Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to Hot Mic. I'm your co-host, Bill Whittle. The latest on Hot Mic is that he's managed to finally come down from his epic ayahuasca trip, which he went on as soon as he found out that Donald Trump had been elected president just a couple weeks ago. We've got him in a detox center. We wanted to send him to Hawaii, but he didn't want to go because he's afraid of the snakes. We tried to tell him there are no snakes in Hawaii, but he didn't listen to us. So we asked if he'd prefer to go to the Sandwich Islands. So he said he thought that was a good idea. So he's currently recuperating on the island of Maui. We expect him back on Monday. He seems to be doing a lot better. I was going to do a one-off episode called A Counterrevolution of Competence to talk about Donald Trump's new appointees, because after the initial euphoria of the election win wore off, we just kept getting more and more dopamine hits as the list of appointees to come in and drain the swamp got longer and longer, and every single one of them seemed to get better and better and better. I was going to go over these appointees, and it ended up just being in my mind just kind of a woo-hoo, look, these are great people. But then I thought, what makes them great? What makes them great replacements? Who are they replacing? What are the qualifications that they have, and what are the qualifications of the people they're replacing? And why will this be a good thing for the country? So instead of one episode, I've decided to break it down into a bunch of different episodes. So looking at the roster of how things stand as we record this, we will be doing an episode on Thomas Homan versus Kamala Harris for Border Czar, Matt Gaetz versus Merrick Garland for Attorney General, Kristi Noem versus Alejandro Mayorkas for Secretary of Homeland Security, Marco Rubio versus Anthony Blinken for Secretary of State, Pete Hegseth versus Lloyd Austin for Secretary of Defense, Robert Kennedy Jr. versus Rachel Levine for Health and Human Services. Plus, we have a bonus round for Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy in the new Department of Government Efficiency. But today, I thought we would start with Tulsi Gabbard versus Avril Haines in the position of Director of National Intelligence. Now, needless to say, pretty much every one of these names, with the possible exception of Marco Rubio, has caused the left's head to continue to explode. It's like watching a string of fireworks going off. And needless to say, their primary objection is, what are their qualifications? They've got a complete lack of qualifications. Well, qualifications are important. Experience is important. But the point I'm trying to get at throughout the course of this series is, what kind of experience and what kind of qualifications are you bringing to the job, and why? For example, if you've got a department that's pretty much just humming along and everything's going swimmingly, there's probably no problem replacing the director with the deputy director. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. But that's not the government that we've got right now. Because if you're talking about qualifications, the real question you need to be asking yourself is, are they qualified for what job? That's why I wanted to start off by looking at Tulsi Gabbard versus Avril Haines. Haines is an enormously qualified individual, but she's not qualified to clean the problems out that have been caused by the kind of qualifications that she brings to it anyway. So let's go ahead and get started with the first of these head-to-head competitions between the outgoing appointee and the incoming Trump appointee, and see if we can figure out why the country is going to become just so much more winning as a result of the new people that Donald Trump has appointed to these various offices. Tulsi Gabbard will be replacing Avril Haines as Director of National Intelligence. Now, the thing you need to understand about Avril Haines is that her background is as a lawyer. She was a law clerk for the Sixth Circuit. She was a legal advisor for the Department of State Office of Treaty Affairs. During the Obama administration, she was initially legal advisor to the Department of State, but then named Deputy Director of the CIA. Now, you may remember that Obama and Susan Rice and the rest of that pro-Iranian foreign policy dominated that Obama administration. This is the same policy, which is Director of National Intelligence under Biden administration, reversed the tough financial sanctions that President Trump had imposed during his first term, which gave Iran the money to fund the October 2023 Hamas terror invasion, the Hezbollah attacks, the Houthis, whose control of the Red Sea entrance to the Suez Canal raises prices on everything now that has to be shipped all the way around Africa. And of course, it allows the Iranian nuclear program to restart. Avril Haines was a part of that under the Biden administration, but let's go back to the Obama administration for a minute, because there's something in her record here that I think is very, very indicative of the kind of person that Avril Haines is. Towards the end of Obama's second term in office, CIA personnel hacked into the computers of Senate staffers regarding a report that the Senate Intelligence Committee was putting together on CIA using torture techniques. Now, it was Avril Haines who chose to not discipline those CIA agents who had hacked into the computers of the United States Senate. She chose not to discipline them over the objection of the Inspector General of the CIA, I might point out. And when the final report on CIA torture was released, it came to 6,700 pages. The person responsible for redacting sensitive information from that report was the outgoing director, national director of intelligence. Of a 6,700-page report, she released 525 pages. So she's pretty good at keeping rogue elements of the intelligence community out of hot water. During the Trump administration, she worked as a senior research scholar at Columbia University, and this has to be said about Columbia. Columbia University became the home of the Frankfurt School. Now, that was formerly the Institute for Social Research in Germany, Frankfurt, Germany, obviously. And this is where critical theory and general cultural Marxism came from. When Adolf Hitler came to power in the 30s, the Institute for Marxism decided to skedaddle on out of there, and they moved to United States. And the location they chose to put their roots down in was Columbia University. And it was at Columbia University that most of the damage was laid out. The plan for the destruction of the United States was laid out at Columbia University by these members of the Frankfurt School. And one of these Marxist theorists was named Herbert Marcuse. And it was his idea to go ahead and do what he called the long march through the institutions. That would be the idea that since the radicalism of the 60s was dying out, the plan would be to take Marxists, put them into journalism schools so that you could then have reporters who would control the flow of information and make sure that that the story and the narrative was constructed in such a way so that everybody had to hear the Marxist side of the argument and nothing else. And then, of course, you would get Marxists into law schools and law departments. They would then go on to become the kind of city attorney generals or federal state attorney generals who would simply decline to prosecute cases that made the left look bad and then start looking for crimes on the part of people who the left wanted to be taken down. This all happened at Columbia University. And I find it interesting that when President Trump came to office and Avril Haines had to go find a place to go and teach and become a scholar, she chose to go back to Columbia University. Also during the Trump administration, Haines served as a consultant for a big tech firm called Palantir Technologies, which was founded by Biden's Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken. This is one of those companies that sucked up data about everybody and what they do, what they watch, who they watch, what they see, all of it. It does nothing but collect data on regular citizens and collate it in a way that can be used to manipulate them. Now, it's interesting that when she was tapped as Director of National Intelligence by Joe Biden 4 years ago, she removed, apparently, this Palantir Technologies credit from her resume. Avril Haines was also the Director of National Intelligence during the absolutely catastrophic withdrawal from Afghanistan and all of the intelligence failures that entailed, including the ones that caused the death of 13 of our servicemen over there in that debacle. As far as her position on world affairs goes, Marco Rubio asked the Director of National Intelligence, Avril Haines, if China was an adversary of the United States. She replied that, quote, China is adversarial and an adversary on some issues, and on other issues we try to cooperate, unquote. And she helpfully went on to say that she was looking forward to a partnership with the United States and China in order to reduce global warming. Avril Haines was sworn in as the Director of National Intelligence on January 21st, 2021. She was the first of Biden's appointees to be sworn in. But now let's look at the other side of the equation and get to the person representing this counter-revolution of competence, at least as far as restoring the United States to its former glory goes, and that'd be Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi Gabbard is a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army Reserve. In July of 2004, she deployed to Iraq with a medical unit and was awarded the Combat Medical Badge and also the Meritorious Service Medal. She completed officer training school at the Alabama Military Academy as a distinguished honor graduate. She was stationed in Kuwait between 2008 and 2009 as an Army military police platoon leader. In 2015, she became a major in the Hawaiian Army National Guard, and in 2020 transferred to the U.S. Army Reserve and was promoted to lieutenant colonel in 2021. Now, as a Democratic Party congressman, in 2015, she called out then-President Barack Obama for his refusal to denounce Islamic extremism. As a legislator, she introduced the Helping Heroes to Fly Act, which made it easier for severely wounded veterans to make it through security clearances at the airport. They often on portable beds. They've got more metal in them than Iron Man does. And so she helped our wounded veterans make domestic travel considerably easier for them. She also sponsored a bill, which I thought was desperately overdue, to award the Congressional Gold Medal to Filipinos and Filipino Americans who fought in the Philippines during World War II. That entire story has gone untold. Now, her record was not perfect as a Democratic legislator from a MAGA point of view, at least. In 2017, she introduced the Off Fossil Fuels Act, which was designed to get the United States to 100% clean energy by 2035, which is probably why Donald Trump didn't tap her to be energy secretary. However, this, I think, is very telling. In 2018, that's 2 years before the 2020 debacle, Tulsi Gabbard introduced the Securing America's Election Act, a bill that would require all districts to use paper ballots, which would yield an auditable paper trail in the event of a recount. In October of 2020, she joined Republican Matt Gaetz in sponsoring a bill to drop criminal charges against deep state whistleblower Edward Snowden, and she also partnered with Republican Tom Massey to do the same thing with Julian Assange. So, what's our takeaway from this head-to-head competition in terms of competent to return this country to its independence and its respect for the rule of law? Well, Avril Haines refused to discipline rogue CIA agents that were hacking into computers of members of the Senate of the United States of America. If they're hacking into the computers of senators, what protection do you think you have from rogue CIA agents as a regular citizen of this country? This is the definition of what the deep state really is. If, like me, you've wondered how the intelligence agencies of the United States of America have gotten so out of control, a large part of the responsibility lies on the shoulders of the woman who refused to discipline those who committed that outrage by breaking into Senate computers and then ended up redacting 92%. She cut 92% of the Senate Intelligence Committee report on CIA torture. That's an attorney. That's a lawyer doing what lawyers do. Tulsi Gabbard doesn't redact secrets. Tulsi Gabbard exposes these things to sunlight. Tulsi Gabbard sponsored a bill demanding transparency in the electoral process, and also an end to the prosecution of whistleblowers who have exposed just how deep this deep state really is. So in conclusion, Avril Haines is absolutely qualified to maintain deep state operations against the American people and the legislative branch, and I'm sure against the executive branch as well. Tulsi Gabbard, on the other hand, has the courage and the competence to put an end to it. I'm going with Tulsi on this one. I'm Bill Whittle. We'll see you next time on Hot Mic.